Okay, wow. You really threw everything but the kitchen sink at us this time.
Oh.
Family trees, court documents, even a radio interview transcript.
Hmm.
I guess we're ready to really dig into the history of the Coral family and their company Coral LLC.
Yeah. Sounds like
This is going to be way beyond just looking at their company website.
this one is really interesting.
Yeah.
What's interesting is just how much their family history is kind of tied up with the history of Ediea as a country.
Right.
We're going to be looking at big historical events.
Oh, wow.
Some real controversial figures.
Interesting.
Maybe even some political maneuvering.
I'm hooked already.
Oh, God.
So where do we even begin with a story this big?
Well, every big dynasty has to start somewhere, right?
Sure.
And in this case, we're starting with George Payne, the founder of what would eventually become Coral LLC.
Okay.
He was born on a family farm, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, rural Ediea, and he was the first person in his family to ever go to university. Yeah, he ended up graduating top of his class with a business degree.
Wow.
But instead of doing what most people with that kind of degree do and heading off to the big city, he actually went back home.
That is not what I would expect.
Yeah.
Why would he go back?
Well, that's the fascinating thing about George Payne.
No.
He saw potential in things that other people didn't. He saw an opportunity, and he turned that family farm into this company that would really become a major part of the Edian economy.
Wow.
It was originally called the George Payne Company,
Okay.
and they were mainly focused on farm machinery and clothing.
It really is amazing to think about
Yeah.
how some of the biggest companies we know today started from such humble beginnings.
Yeah.
It's a real rags to riches story.
Well, it seems that way, right?
Yeah.
At first, our research shows that there's maybe more to the story than meets the eye.
Uh-oh.
George Penn was definitely a brilliant innovator,
Okay.
but I guess let's just say his actions sometimes weren't really what we would think of as ethical today.
Okay, spill the tea. Our listener is waiting for the juicy details.
Well, one of the sources we have is actually a court document from 1842.
Oh, wow.
And it shows that George Payne was actually owning slaves,
What?
even though slavery was completely illegal in Ediea at the time.
No way.
Yeah, and he basically was able to use his money and his influence to avoid any kind of legal trouble.
Wait, slaves. That's pretty dark
Yeah.
for this rags to riches story.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you wonder how people saw him at the time. Was this common knowledge?
Right.
Did people know? Was there like any public outcry about this?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the sources that we have don't really give a clear answer on that.
Oh, yeah.
It definitely does complicate his legacy, though, right?
Yeah.
Here we have this guy who built this hugely successful company.
Right.
He was obviously a brilliant businessman, but he was also perpetuating this really awful system.
Oh.
It really makes you think about progress and who actually benefits from it.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that it seems like the Coral family history is just full of these contradictions.
Yeah, for sure. For example, when we look at his personal life,
Oh, yeah.
we have records that show that he actually built a 3-story house on his estate for his wife.
Wow.
Yeah, and as time went on, he just kept adding to it, making it bigger.
Nice.
Yeah, and then when she died, he was just devastated by it. And he ended up building this whole beautiful terrarium in her memory.
Wow.
And then he also spent a lot of time by the lake that was on the property, just kind of finding solace in nature.
So he was a ruthless businessman who owned slaves.
Right.
But also a loving husband who found peace in nature.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're talking about two different people.
Well, it just shows you that people are complicated, right?
Right.
No one's all good or all bad.
Yeah.
George Payne was a product of his time
Yeah.
with all the good and the bad that comes with that.
Right.
And of course, his story is really just the beginning of the Coral family saga.
Okay, well, I am all ears. Tell me what happened next.
Yeah.
Did the company stay in the family?
It did.
Okay.
His grandson, Robert Coral, he eventually took over. And it was actually Robert who renamed the company to Coral Equipment Company.
Yep.
And then the estate became known as Coral Estate.
Okay.
And Robert just kept building on what his grandfather had started, expanding the company even more.
It's so interesting to think about how these companies we know today
Yeah.
have these long histories
Right.
full of all these twists and turns that we would never expect.
Yeah.
You know, you think you know a company,
Yeah.
and then you find out something like this.
Exactly.
And sometimes those twists and turns
Yeah.
lead us to some really unexpected places.
Sir.
Like, did you know that Robert Korel had a pretty interesting run-in with Adolf Hitler?
Oh, yeah.
Robert Korel and Hitler? Now, that's not something I was expecting to hear today.
Well, during World War II, all these rumors started going around that Robert Korel was actually sympathetic to Hitler and his whole ideology.
Really?
Yeah, and it caused quite a stir back then, especially with everything going on globally.
Yeah.
But luckily, we have a transcript of a radio interview that Robert did in 1943, and he addresses those accusations head on.
Oh, really?
Mm.
So did he deny it?
He did, and I think maybe a little more strongly than denying it.
Okay.
He used, I guess, some really colorful language
Okay.
to express exactly how he felt about Hitler.
Okay.
And he made it very clear that he was not at all a fan of the Nazi regime.
So he basically told Hitler where he could shove it.
Pretty much.
On live radio.
Yeah.
That's one way to shut down a rumor.
Yeah, it's funny how easy misinformation can spread,
Yeah.
even about people who are really powerful.
Yeah. And speaking of powerful people,
Right.
we can't forget about the women of the Korel family.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We have sources that mention Carol Korel and Kaylin Korel leading the company at different points.
Yeah, the Korel women, they were not just sitting around watching.
Yeah.
They were movers and shakers in their own right.
Seems like it.
Especially Carol Korel, her story is really interesting.
Oh.
You know, she became CEO in 1973,
Right.
but before she joined the family business, she actually had a really interesting career.
Okay, you've got me on the edge of my seat. Tell me what she did.
Well, let's just say it involved secret missions,
Okay.
code names,
Interesting.
and a whole lot of international intrigue.
Right.
Carol Korel was an agent in the Edian spy force.
No way a secret agent turned CEO.
Yeah.
That's not a career path you hear about every day.
Nope.
I bet her time as a spy gave her some unique skills
Right.
that really helped her in the boardroom.
Makes you wonder.
Right? Like, what kind of secrets did she find?
Yeah.
What kind of risks did she take?
Mm-hmm.
And how did all that shape how she led the company?
Yeah. Great question.
And this deep dive's just getting better and better.
We're just getting started. We've got so much more to talk about.
Right.
Kaylin Korel's time as CEO, the family getting involved in politics,
Oh, wow.
and what's next for Korel LLC with this whole new generation coming up.
Buckle up, everybody. We're back and ready to dive even deeper into this Korel family history.
Yeah.
Last time, we learned some pretty shocking stuff about George Payne, the company's founder.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just starting to get into Carol's story as a spy for the Edian government.
It's not every day you see a CEO with that kind of background.
Oh,
Really makes you think about how that experience would affect her as a leader.
Absolutely. So tell me more about her time as a spy.
Okay.
Was she like a real-life James Bond, jet-setting around taking down bad guys?
Well, maybe not quite as glamorous as the movies,
Yeah.
but definitely some high-stakes stuff.
Okay.
We found a transcript from her office, and it looks like she had missions in the Soviet Union
Wow.
and even in the UK during the Cold War.
The Cold War. That's serious business.
Oh, yeah.
So what exactly was she doing?
Well, it seems like she was going into secure places to get classified documents.
Yeah.
She was building relationships with important people, and she even found herself in some pretty dangerous situations.
Really?
She was definitely someone who could think on her feet and adapt to change.
That's incredible. It seems like this whole family is full of risk takers.
Yeah.
Whether it's turning a farm into a global company
Right.
or going undercover during the Cold War.
It's a real pattern with them.
Yeah.
Always pushing boundaries, trying new things.
And it's especially cool to see Carol doing all this in a field that was mostly men back then.
Definitely, the Korel women were not afraid to break the mold.
Speaking of which, we also have some interesting info about Kaylin Korel, Carol's daughter.
Oh, yeah.
She had a pretty adventurous career, too, before becoming CEO.
Oh, for sure. Before she was running a company.
Yeah.
She was flying F-14s in the Edian Navy.
No way.
We found a snooze news report from 1999 showing her on the aircraft carrier, the Roland Almora, getting ready to be deployed to the Mediterranean.
From CEO to spy to fighter pilot.
Right.
These Korel women are amazing.
They really are.
Do you think they ever felt pressure to stick to more traditional roles?
Mm-hmm.
Or were they encouraged to follow their passions?
Well, in that same news report, Kaylin actually talks about how much she loves flying
Okay.
and how tough it is to balance that with the fact that she might have to take over the family business one day. She even says that becoming CEO would basically end her career as a pilot.
Wow. She was really torn.
It sounds like it.
But she did end up as CEO.
Yeah, it really makes you think
Mm-hmm.
about those big life choices and how they can change everything.
For sure. And it also makes me wonder if her skills as a pilot.
Oh, yeah.
The discipline, the strategy, the ability to stay calm under pressure, if all that helped her when she became CEO.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it?
Yeah, the cockpit of a fighter jet and the boardroom of a huge company.
Right.
Maybe they're not so different after all.
It's funny how those things connect.
And it's not just the women.
Yeah.
Remember George Payne?
Right.
Brilliant businessman, but also a slave owner.
We can't forget about that part of his story.
It's important to see the whole picture.
Exactly. And we found a source that really gives us a glimpse into that time.
Okay, what is it?
It's a letter handwritten by one of the people enslaved by George Payne.
Oh, wow.
His name was Ablis Ruckinell.
A first-hand account from back then.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What does he say?
It's tough to read, to be honest.
Oh.
He talks about how hard life was working for Payne. Always afraid, always hoping for freedom.
Wow.
He writes about dreaming of the day Payne would die because that would be the only way he could be free.
It's a powerful reminder of how awful slavery was.
Yeah.
And the impact it still has today.
It makes George Payne's story even more complicated.
Right.
Makes us think about the dark side of his success.
It also shows how important it is to look at history from different perspectives. Without Ruckinell's letter, our understanding of George Payne would be totally incomplete.
Right, we wouldn't hear the voices of the people who suffered because of him.
It reminds us that history isn't just about dates and events.
Yeah.
It's about people's real lives, their struggles, their triumphs, and their stories that sometimes get lost.
Yeah, and those hidden stories can really change how we see the past.
This deep dive is definitely changing how I see the Coral family. I thought this would be like a typical company profile.
Right.
But it's so much more than that.
That's what makes history so fascinating.
Yeah.
There's always something new to learn.
So what else is there?
Give me a teaser.
Yeah. What else is coming up?
Well, we've talked about George Carroll and Kaylin.
Right.
But we haven't really looked at the company itself.
Okay.
How did it go from a small farm to a global giant?
Yeah.
What were the big choices, the innovations, the challenges that shaped it? And maybe most importantly, what will Coral LLC look like under the next generation?
Now that's what I call a cliffhanger. Can't wait to see what happens next in this Coral family saga.
Well, you won't have to wait long.
Okay.
And we'll be back for part 3 of our deep dive.
Oh.
We'll look at how the company changed how it impacted Ediea and what challenges and opportunities Madison Coral will face as the new leader.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Coral family and their company, Coral LLC.
Yeah.
We've gone through some really incredible stories.
We have.
Learned about some remarkable people. And I think it's safe to say that their history is way more complex than anyone could have guessed.
It's been a wild ride, hasn't it?
It really has.
From that little farm out in rural Ediea to a global company, the Coral family has definitely made their mark.
Absolutely. So let's take a step back for a second and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
How did this company go from making farm equipment and clothes to this huge corporation we know today?
Well, it goes back to George Payne and his ideas about farming. He was always trying to find ways to do things better and faster.
He really was ahead of his time.
Yeah, and he wasn't afraid to try new things.
But then his grandson, Robert Coral, he took the company in a new direction.
Right. Robert expanded the business, built on what George had started.
Exactly. And then there's Carol Coral, the secret agent turned CEO.
Oh, yeah. She's a fascinating one.
She decides to switch from farm equipment to things people use every day.
That was a huge change.
Yeah, it was a big risk. But it looks like it paid off.
It did. It's amazing how each generation brought something new to the company.
Yeah, they were always willing to adapt and take risks.
And of course, we can't forget about Kaylin Coral.
Right, the fighter pilot.
Yeah, who led the company through that global recession.
She really stepped up during a tough time.
She made some hard choices, changed how the company was structured, and got them back on track.
She's a great example of how resilient the Coral family is.
They always seem to find a way through tough times.
It's an incredible story of innovation, adaptation, and resilience.
It really is.
But we can't forget about the not-so-great parts.
Right.
Like George Payne owning slaves, and some of the questions about how the company did business later on.
It's a good reminder that no company is perfect.
Yeah. No matter how successful or groundbreaking they are.
We have to look at both the good and the bad.
Absolutely. And that leads us to today and the future of Coral LLC.
Okay.
Madison Coral, the future CEO, is actually following in her great-great-great-grandfather's footsteps.
Oh, how so?
She's at university right now.
Wow, just like George Payne.
What do you think? What kind of leader will Madison be?
That's a tough one to answer.
Yeah.
She's got a complicated legacy to live up to.
Right? Both good and bad.
Will she keep making bold moves like her family before her?
Hmm.
Or will she do things differently?
Yeah.
Maybe focus more on sustainability and ethical business.
Her brother Mason decided to go into politics.
Right, instead of the family business.
Do you think Madison feels the pressure
Oh, I'm sure she does.
to live up to the Coral name?
Yeah, and she's the only one besides George Payne to go to college before becoming CEO.
Maybe that means she'll have a different way of looking at things?
It's possible maybe she'll bring some fresh ideas to the company.
It'll be interesting to see how she handles the challenges ahead.
Yeah, the world is a different place now.
Right. Climate change technology changing so fast,
Mm-hmm.
and people want companies to be more accountable.
She'll have to be flexible, creative, and really think about the ethics of her decisions.
It's pretty amazing to think about.
Yeah,
The future of this huge company is in the hands of someone so young.
it's a lot of responsibility.
It is, and it makes you wonder what kind of mark she'll make.
It's exciting to think about.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the Coral family and their company.
I can't believe how much we uncovered.
Me neither. It's been a journey full of surprises and intrigue and really makes you think.
It's been great exploring all this with you.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll be back to talk about Madison Coral and her impact on the company and the world.
It wouldn't surprise me.
This family seems to have a knack for making history.
They do.
That's all the time we have for today. But remember, there are tons of stories like this out there just waiting to be discovered.
You just have to look for them.
So keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and never stop exploring the world with curiosity and an open mind. You never know what you might find out there. Until next time.